Lines of Lawrence Sullivan's Tesla gleamed under the late afternoon sun as he navigated the winding drive up to his estate. At 45, Lawrence exuded an air of calm dominance. As the CEO of Sullivan Technologies, a leading cybersecurity firm, he had built his empire on precision, trust, and discipline. But even the sharpest tools could miss the rust creeping in beneath their surface. The front door clicked open, revealing the pristine, modernist expanse of his home. Polished wood floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and framed family portraits hung on the walls, tokens of a life meticulously curated. But as Lawrence stepped into the foyer, a faint unease tickled the edges of his mind, a sense of something out of place. "Lawrence? Patricia's voice carried from the grand living room. Her tone was warm, cheerful even, but the years had taught him to hear the undertones others missed. There was a brittleness to it today, of forced sweetness. He rounded the corner to find her sprawled on the cream leather couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, her auburn hair catching the light, and smiled. "Home early? Board meeting wrapped up sooner than expected," he replied, loosening his tie. "Thought I'd enjoy a rare quiet evening at home." Patricia's lips curled in a faint smile, but her eyes flickered with something he couldn't place. Discomfort? Guilt? Perhaps he was imagining things. After all, Patricia had always been a master of poise. As she moved toward the kitchen, Lawrence lingered in the living room. His gaze drifted to the family portraits, images of a life that outwardly seemed flawless. But the anomalies had been stacking up. Late-night phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room, credit card charges for purchases he hadn't made, and whispers of unrest within his company. His thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of his phone. A message from Chris Berger, his head of security, flashed across the screen. "New intel. You want to see this? Can you talk?" Lawrence slipped into his study, the heavy door closing with a satisfying click. The room was his sanctuary, filled with dark wood shelves, lined with books and awards, and a massive desk that held his laptop and secure communication tools. He dialed Chris, and the line was picked up almost immediately. "Chris, what is it?" "I've been running that background check you requested," Chris began, his voice low and cautious. "Your instincts were right. There's movement, financial transfers, offshore accounts, and it's not just Patricia." A chill ran down Lawrence's spine. "Explain." "Patricia's been meeting with Herman Black regularly," Chris continued. "We intercepted a few conversations. They're planning something big, an attempt to oust you from the company. There's talk of shell companies, asset seizures, even falsified evidence to claim your unfitness as CEO. Herman Black, the man Lawrence had trusted for over a decade, his COO, his confidant. The betrayal cut deeper than he cared to admit. "Send me everything you have," Lawrence ordered, his voice cold and even. "It's already on its way, but..." "Lawrence..." Chris hesitated. "What?" "It's worse than an affair or a corporate takeover. They've been tampering with your relationships, your kids, your allies on the board. There's a coordinated effort to isolate you. Patricia's been painting you as controlling, distant, and Herman, he's positioning himself as the savior figure." Lawrence's jaw tightened. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was an existential threat to everything he'd built. "Chris," he said, his voice steel, "prepare Protocol Zero. Full surveillance. Every channel. No limits." "You sure? It's an all-in play." Absolutely. I'm not just protecting my company. I'm protecting my family, my legacy." As Lawrence ended the call, he stared out the window at the vast estate he'd worked his entire life to create. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn. In those shadows, He could almost see the threads of betrayal weaving themselves into a net, a trap, meant to ensnare him. But they had underestimated him. Lawrence Sullivan wasn't a man who crumbled under pressure. He thrived on it. By the time Patricia waltzed into his study later that evening, her red dress catching the dim light, Lawrence had already set the wheels in motion. Her laughter, as she recounted an innocuous story about her day, felt hollow to his ears. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice dripping with feigned concern. "Couldn't be better," Lawrence replied smoothly, offering her a practiced smile. "Just reviewing some plans for the gala next week." Patricia's eyes lit up at the mention of the gala, another event where she could flaunt her charms. She had no idea that Lawrence was already preparing to turn that night of celebration into her reckoning. For now he played his part, masking the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. After all, the best counterattacks were those no one saw coming. Lawrence Sullivan sat in the dim glow of his study, the quiet hum of his encrypted laptop filling the space. The images on his screen were damning. High-resolution surveillance captures of Patricia and Herman at a luxury hotel, their body language intimate, their whispers incriminating. His hands hovered over the keyboard, but his expression remained calm, methodic. Chris Berger's voice crackled through the secure line on speaker. "Sir, we've traced additional funds, offshore accounts, tied to a shell company registered under Patricia's alias. The transfers are linked to Herman and a few external consultants." Lawrence leaned back in his leather chair, his sharp mind already assembling the puzzle pieces. "What's the shell company's purpose?" Chris hesitated. "It seems to be a holding account for patents. Your patents. They're preparing to launch competing products. If this goes public, it could severely undermine Sullivan Technologies' market dominance." Lawrence's jaw tightened imperceptibly. His company wasn't just a business. It was his legacy, built from the ground up with sweat and sleepless nights. Patricia and Herman weren't merely betraying him. They were attempting to destroy the very foundation of his life. "Keep digging," Lawrence said, his voice low but resolute. "I want everything. Accounts, transactions, meetings. And focus on the gala. They'll act soon, and I need to be prepared." As Chris signed off, Lawrence's gaze drifted to the framed photographs lining his desk. One showed him with Patricia and their 2 children, smiling during a ski trip in Aspen. His fingers tapped the frame absent-mindedly, his mind racing. Patricia had always been ambitious, but her betrayal wasn't just about power. It was personal. She wanted to dismantle his life piece by piece. The following day, Lawrence enacted the first phase of his counterattack. He left for work earlier than usual, using the quiet hours of dawn to meet Chris in a nondescript building downtown. It served as a covert operations hub for Sullivan Technologies, where its private security team monitored threats. Chris greeted him with a tablet loaded with new evidence. "We've got audio now," he said, playing a snippet. Patricia's voice, crisp and clear, filled the room. "Once the merger is finalized, Lawrence will be too busy fighting the fallout to notice what's happening at home. He thinks he's untouchable, but Herman and I have covered every angle." A male voice, Herman, chimed in. "And when we move the patents, we'll cut off his cash flow. Without that, Sullivan Technologies is a sinking ship." Lawrence listened intently, his face impassive. But inwardly, the cold fury burned hotter. The gala was just days away, and it was clear Patricia and Herman planned to use the event as a smokescreen for their final moves. Chris leaned forward. "We also uncovered messages between Patricia and board members. She's been spreading rumors about your leadership, claims of erratic behavior, paranoia, even embezzlement." Lawrence exhaled slowly, his mind already formulating a response. "They think they've cornered me," he said, his voice calm. "Let them believe it." Over the next 48 hours, Lawrence operated with surgical precision. His legal team, sworn to secrecy, drafted contracts and contingency clauses designed to trap Patricia and Herman in their own scheme. Meanwhile, he worked with Chris to strengthen his leverage. Encrypted communications, surveillance footage, and detailed financial trails that painted a damning picture of their conspiracy. At home, Patricia continued her charade. She floated through their shared spaces with an air of confidence, casually mentioning the gala and feigning interest in his day. Lawrence played along, his demeanor as steady as ever, but every interaction reinforced his resolve. One evening, Patricia brought up their children. "Mandy's been acting distant lately," she said, swirling her wine. "Maybe you should spend more time with her. She's at a vulnerable age." The hypocrisy was galling. Lawrence knew Patricia had been subtly driving a wedge between him and their daughter, spreading doubts about his dedication as a father. "I'll talk to her," he replied evenly, masking his frustration. That night, he visited Mandy in her room. She was hunched over her sketchbook, headphones on, barely noticing his entrance. "Hey, kiddo," Lawrence said softly, sitting beside her. She pulled off her headphones. "Hey, Dad!" He glanced at her drawing, a surreal landscape in vivid colors. "This is incredible. You've got real talent." Her cheeks flushed with pride. "Thanks." Lawrence hesitated, then decided to broach the topic carefully. Mandy, has your mom said anything unusual about me?" Mandy frowned, her pencil stilling. "She said you're really busy with work, that you don't have time for us anymore." Lawrence's chest tightened. He placed a hand on her shoulder, meeting her gaze. "I'll always make time for you, don't ever doubt that." As Mandy smiled faintly, Lawrence resolved to protect his children from Patricia's manipulations. They were the one part of his life he wouldn't allow her to corrupt. The night before the gala, Lawrence finalized the last details of his plan. Protocol Zero was ready, a sweeping counterstrike that would expose Patricia and Herman while safeguarding Sullivan Technologies. Standing in his study, he glanced at the family portraits one last time. By this time tomorrow, everything would change. Patricia thought she was the puppet master, but she was about to learn that Lawrence Sullivan wasn't a man to be underestimated. The night of the gala arrived with a flourish of shimmering gowns, tailored suits, and the soft hum of champagne glasses clinking against one another. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel glittered with opulence, the high ceilings adorned with cascading crystal chandeliers and delicate floral arrangements. It was a celebration of Sullivan Technologies' latest success, or so the attendees believed. For Patricia Sullivan, the evening was another stage on which she could shine. Draped in a floor-length crimson gown that hugged her figure, she commanded attention from the moment she entered. By her side was Herman Black, ostensibly there as the COO of Sullivan Technologies, but lingering a touch too close for propriety. Lawrence arrived separately, his charcoal suit impeccable, his face a mask of serene control. The cameras clicked as he entered, but he ignored the press, heading straight for the private wing where Chris Berger and his security team had set up their operations center. "Status?" Lawrence asked, his voice crisp. Chris handed him a tablet displaying multiple live feeds from the ballroom. "Everyone's in place. Patricia and Herman have already started moving among the investors. We've intercepted their conversations. Lots of insinuations about your leadership and promises of a new direction for the company." Lawrence studied the screen, watching his wife laugh at something Herman whispered. Her smile was radiant, her confidence undeniable. He felt a pang of bitterness, but quickly buried it. He wasn't here to dwell on emotions. This was business, and the stakes were higher than ever. Chris continued, Our IT team has locked down the sensitive files they planned to access tonight. Any attempt to breach the system will trigger a notification. As for the financial transfers, they've begun routing funds to their offshore accounts as expected. Good, Lawrence said, his tone cold. Let them think they're winning. Back in the ballroom, Patricia glided effortlessly from one conversation to another. Investors were charmed by her wit and elegance, her words subtly planting doubts about Lawrence's ability to lead. Muenzedo. Brilliant, of course, she said to one group, sipping her champagne. But sometimes brilliance can blind you to practical realities. A CEO needs balance, wouldn't you agree? The investors nodded, some murmuring agreement. Herman stepped in smoothly, adding, "That's why a strong support system is critical. Patricia and I have worked tirelessly to ensure Sullivan Technologies thrives, even under challenging circumstances." Patricia's eyes gleamed. Everything was falling into place. She glanced at her phone. No messages from Lawrence yet. He was probably sulking somewhere, oblivious to how thoroughly she and Herman had outmaneuvered him. An hour into the gala, the guests gathered for the main event, a presentation celebrating the merger between Sullivan Technologies and Jared Norton's firm. Lawrence took the stage, his expression calm and composed as he addressed the audience. "Good evening, and thank you all for being here," he began. "Tonight, we celebrate a partnership that promises to revolutionize our industry. But before we move forward, I want to share some insights about the journey that brought us here." As he spoke, Chris worked behind the scenes, activating the next phase of their plan. The massive screens behind Lawrence flickered, displaying charts and graphs. The crowd murmured in approval, impressed by the projected growth. Then the images shifted. Photos of financial statements appeared, showing irregular transactions tied to Patricia and Herman's shell company. The room fell silent as the data rolled on, exposing offshore accounts and internal memos that detailed their betrayal. Patricia's smile froze, her hand tightening around her champagne flute. "What's happening?" she whispered to Herman, her voice tinged with panic. I don't know," Herman stammered, his face pale. Lawrence's voice cut through the room, steady and commanding. "What you're seeing is a detailed account of financial misconduct within Sullivan Technologies. These actions were orchestrated by individuals I trusted, individuals who sought to undermine this company for personal gain." The audience turned to Patricia and Herman, their expressions shifting from confusion to disbelief. Lawrence stepped down from the stage, his eyes locking with Patricia's. "Would you care to explain, Patricia?" he asked, his tone deceptively mild. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Herman began to sputter excuses, but Lawrence silenced him with a raised hand. "Enough," Lawrence said, his voice firm. "The evidence speaks for itself, and in case anyone doubts its authenticity, I have here signed confessions from key players who were pressured into participating in this scheme. They've agreed to testify." Chris stepped forward, flanked by security personnel. "Mr. Black, Mrs. Sullivan, you'll need to come with us. We have additional questions and the authorities have been notified." Patricia's composure shattered. "You can't do this," she hissed, her eyes blazing. "I'm your wife." Lawrence's expression didn't waver. "You stopped being my wife the moment you decided to betray me and our family." As security escorted Patricia and Herman out, the room buzzed with whispers. Some guests avoided eye contact with Lawrence, while others approached to offer their support. Later, in the privacy of the operations center, Chris handed Lawrence a folder. "It's all over the media now. The board has unanimously backed you, and the merger has been delayed pending further investigation." Lawrence nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Good work, Chris." As he exited the St. Regis and stepped into the cool night air, Lawrence felt an unexpected sense of calm. The storm had passed, and though the damage was significant, he had emerged stronger. This wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. His company, his legacy, and his family's future were secure. And Lawrence Sullivan, a man who thrived under pressure, was ready to rebuild. The sun rose over San Francisco, its light bathing the city's iconic skyline in golden hues. But for Patricia Sullivan, it felt more like the harsh spotlight of an interrogation room. She sat in a cold, sparsely furnished office at the downtown police precinct, her crimson gown crumpled and makeup streaked from the events of the previous night. Herman sat across from her, his confidence from the gallows a distant memory. "What do you think they have?" Herman whispered, his eyes darting toward the two-way mirror. Patricia glared at him, her jaw clenched. "Does it matter? They've already decided we're guilty." Meanwhile, in a private conference room elsewhere in the building, Lawrence Sullivan reviewed documents with his legal team. Chris Berger stood by his side, his expression stoic as they discussed the next steps. "The authorities have enough to charge Patricia and Herman with fraud and conspiracy," said Jenna Kim, Lawrence's lead attorney. "But we need to decide how far you want to push this. The board is satisfied, and your position as CEO is secure. Public sympathy is firmly on your side." Lawrence leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. "This isn't just about protecting the company. It's about ensuring this never happens again. I want a full audit of every department. If anyone else was complicit, I want their names, no loose ends." Jenna nodded, making notes. "Understood." Chris crossed his arms, his face unreadable. "What about Patricia and Herman personally? Do you want to pursue additional charges?" Lawrence exhaled slowly, his hand steepled in thought. "I want them to face the consequences of their actions, but I won't drag this into the gutter. Let the evidence speak for itself." By the afternoon, news of the gala debacle had reached every corner of Silicon Valley. Headlines blared. Sullivan Technologies CEO exposes internal betrayal, accompanied by candid photos of Patricia and Herman being escorted out of the event. Mandy, Lawrence's teenage daughter, sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through her phone. Her friends had flooded her messages with questions, memes, and gossip, but Mandy ignored them all. She couldn't shake the image of her mother's face as security led her away. Her father's knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in." Lawrence entered, his usually commanding presence softened by concern. He glanced at the posters on her walls and the sketches scattered across her desk before sitting on the edge of her bed. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. Mandy shrugged, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweatshirt. "I don't know. Everyone's talking about it. About Mom." Lawrence nodded, his expression pained. I wish I could shield you from this, Mandy, but I couldn't let it go on. What she did, it wasn't just about me. It hurt all of us." "She said you didn't care," Mandy said, her voice trembling. She said you were too busy with work to notice us." Lawrence's throat tightened. "That's not true," he said firmly. "I've made mistakes, Mandy. I know I've been focused on the company, but everything I've done has been for you and your brother. I promise. No matter what happens, I'm here for you." Mandy nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time in months, she leaned into her father's embrace. At Sullivan Technologies, the fallout rippled through every level of the organization. Employees whispered about the scandal in the hallways, while department heads scrambled to reassure investors. In his office, Lawrence reviewed the audit reports pouring in. Chris entered, a stack of files in hand. "We've identified 2 more employees tied to the scheme," Chris said, placing the files on Lawrence's desk. "Low-level analysts, but they were feeding information to Herman." Lawrence nodded grimly. "Terminate their contracts immediately. Make sure legal reviews the evidence before we file charges." Chris hesitated. "There's one more thing. Your brother Guillermo was more involved than we initially thought. He's been funneling money through R&D for years. Some of the shell companies Patricia used were set up with his help. The betrayal stung, but Lawrence's face betrayed no emotion. "Bring Guillermo in for a meeting," he said. "I'll handle it." Later that evening, Lawrence met Guillermo in a private conference room at the Sullivan Technologies headquarters. Guillermo arrived looking nervous, his tie askew, and sweat beading on his forehead. "Lawrence," Guillermo began, his voice shaky, "I didn't know how deep it went. Patricia, she convinced me it was just a business arrangement. I swear, I didn't mean to—" "Stop," Lawrence said sharply, cutting him off. "You don't get to play the victim here. You knew exactly what you were doing. You betrayed your own brother. For what? Money. Power." Guillermo opened his mouth to respond, but Lawrence held up a hand. "I should press charges, but I won't, for the sake of our family. Instead, you'll resign immediately and return every cent you took. If you ever cross me again, I won't be so lenient." Guillermo slumped in his chair, defeated. "Understood." By the end of the week, Patricia and Herman's charges were formalized, Guillermo's resignation announced, and Sullivan Technologies stabilized. Lawrence stood in his office, looking out over the city. The fight had taken its toll, but he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Chris entered with a small smile. "The board wants to know if you're ready to address the team." Lawrence turned, his expression resolute. "Let's do it." In the company auditorium, Lawrence addressed his employees. This company was built on trust, integrity, and innovation. Recent events tested those values, but we've come out stronger. To those who stayed loyal, I thank you. Together, we'll rebuild not just our business, but our bond as a team. The applause was thunderous. For the first time in weeks, Lawrence allowed himself a genuine smile. The betrayal had nearly destroyed him, but he had survived. More than that, he had emerged as a stronger leader, father, and man. The courtroom was hushed, the air thick with tension, as Patricia Sullivan sat at the defendant's table. She avoided Lawrence's gaze, her polished demeanor now a pale shadow of the confident woman who once walked beside him at corporate events. Herman Black sat next to her, his usual bravado replaced by a nervous fidgeting. Lawrence sat in the gallery, his presence commanding even in silence. His legal team had spent weeks building an airtight case, and today was the culmination of their efforts. The judge's gavel rang out. "Mrs. Sullivan, Mr. Black, the evidence presented is irrefutable. This court finds you both guilty of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted embezzlement. Sentencing will proceed next week." Patricia's shoulders sagged, but she managed a sideways glance at Lawrence as the bailiff escorted her out. Her once vivid defiance had dimmed into something close to regret. Lawrence didn't flinch. He remained seated, his expression calm but resolute. This wasn't about vengeance, it was about closure. That evening, Lawrence returned to the Sullivan estate, a home that now felt larger and quieter than ever. The portraits on the walls seemed to gaze down on him, reminders of a life that had fractured. Yet, as he stepped into the living room, a warmth greeted him. Mandy and her brother Bill sat on the couch, engrossed in an old movie they used to watch as a family. "Dad," Mandy exclaimed, jumping up to greet him. Lawrence smiled, his weariness melting away. "Movie night." "Bill insisted," she said, rolling her eyes, "but I kind of missed it too." Lawrence glanced at his son, who grinned sheepishly. It was the first time in weeks that Bill had seemed genuinely at ease. Lawrence settled into the couch between them, the weight of recent events lifting slightly. For years, his focus had been divided. His company demanding one half of him, his family the other. Now, for the first time in what felt like forever, he could give his children the attention they deserved. The next morning, Lawrence walked into Sullivan Technologies with renewed purpose. The company was still reeling from the scandal, but there was a sense of optimism in the air. Employees greeted him warmly, their confidence in his leadership evident. In the boardroom, Lawrence stood before his executive team. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've faced challenges that would have destroyed lesser organizations. But Sullivan Technologies isn't just a company, it's a family. We've survived because we stood together. Now it's time to rebuild, stronger than ever." Applause filled the room. Lawrence continued, outlining a vision for the company's future that emphasized transparency, innovation, and a renewed commitment to ethics. "From this day forward," he concluded, "we move forward with integrity. Every decision we make, every step we take, will reflect the values that built this company. No shortcuts, no compromises." As the meeting adjourned, Chris Berger approached him. "You've got their full support, Lawrence. The team's ready to back you all the way." Lawrence nodded, his determination unwavering. "Good. We're not just repairing the damage, we're setting a new standard." In the weeks that followed, Lawrence worked tirelessly to implement sweeping changes. The company underwent a rigorous audit, clearing out any lingering traces of corruption. He promoted young, forward-thinking executives to leadership roles, ensuring a fresh perspective at every level. Outside of work, he focused on repairing his relationship with his children. Mandy took to joining him at his morning runs, the two of them sharing stories and jokes along the way. Bill, who had once been distant, began seeking Lawrence's advice on his college plans. One evening, as they sat on the back patio, Mandy turned to him. "Dad, do you ever regret everything that happened with Mom?" Lawrence considered her question carefully. "I regret that it hurt you and your brother. But I don't regret standing up for what was right. Sometimes doing the right thing comes with a cost. But it's worth it if it means protecting the people you love." Mandy nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad you didn't let her win." On a crisp fall morning, Sullivan Technologies held a grand relaunch event at its headquarters. The media, once skeptical of the company's survival, now buzzed with excitement. Lawrence took the stage to unveil a groundbreaking new product, one developed in secrecy, to outmaneuver competitors who had sought to exploit the company's turmoil. "We're not just back," Lawrence said, addressing the crowd. "We're better than ever." The applause was deafening, and as Lawrence stepped off the stage, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known in years. That night, back at home, Lawrence poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat on the patio, gazing at the stars. The journey had been grueling, and the scars it left would remain. But he also felt a quiet pride, a knowledge that he had faced betrayal and emerged not just intact, but stronger. Chris's words from weeks ago echoed in his mind. It's not just about surviving. It's about thriving. Lawrence raised his glass to the night sky. "Here's to thriving," he murmured, the beginnings of a smile on his face. And with that, he stepped back into the warmth of his home, ready to embrace the life he had fought so hard to protect.